Okay, welcome. Nice to meet you to one of the most annoying topics of development, security. Okay. My name is Niko Köbler. I'm from Germany. I'm a freelance guy, and I'm more than 20 years in IT business. I recognized it a few weeks ago when I got my new fitness tracker. It has a very small display, and I have to put my wrist far away from my eyes, so I'm getting pretty old. Besides my day job, I'm co-organizing a local Java user group in Darmstadt. It's nearby Frankfurt, and speak occasionally at tech conferences all over the world. And last year I wrote a book about serverless computing in the cloud, but that's not the topic I will talk about today. And of course, as every speaker and developer or whatever guy, I'm on Twitter. So let's start talking about security. Who of you likes to deal with security? 1, 2, 3, 4. 3.5. Okay, 3.5. It's not that pretty much. So did I until a few years ago. The reason was, for me, I didn't understand it. Then I took the time and tried to understand it, read the specs, and suddenly it made, hey, it's easy, it's pretty easy. But you have to take the time and understand how all this stuff really works. And security is a wide range of topics, and there are also the OWASP top 10, which deal with the most frequent security issues. And but we don't want to talk about the OWASP top 10 today. We want to talk about authentication and authorization. So, who of you thinks he or she knows what's the difference between authorization and authentication? Okay, it's a bit more than the half. It's pretty easy, I think, but every time I'm talking to customers, most of them don't get it right. And it's easy as authentication is, I don't know who you are, please authenticate yourself, tell me who you are, and how can I make sure that you, the person you tell me you are. And authorization is the next step. After I know who you are, I have to check what are you allowed to do. This is authorization. And yeah, also I mix it up still in my daily business when talking to customers. Sometimes I say authentication when I mean authorization and vice versa. So if I mix it up today, please don't be angry with me. But also the HTTP status codes mix it up a bit, and these are pretty old. So the guys who built up the status codes didn't get it either. We have the 401, which is called unauthorized, but it means unauthenticated or not authenticated. 401 is not really, it does not deal with authorization, it deals with authentication. And once you're authenticated, the status code 403 tells you you're not allowed to do anything, you're forbidden. So 401 unauthorized, it's not really correct. So, and we are in distributed APIs nowadays. Distributed systems, distributed APIs. At least we have a single page application in the backend that's also a distributed system. And how do we log in such a system in a secure way? And when APIs are talking to each other, how do they authenticate and authorize each other? And when it comes, when we have distributed APIs or distributed systems, should we have a centralized approach when it comes to authorization or authentication? I think yes, because it's called single sign-on, and single sign-on means there's only one system who knows my credentials and which knows how to verify these credentials, and not 2 or 3 or more replicated systems with replicated data, because then the data, the credential data of our users is replicated, and many systems have a knowledge about this, and we don't want to have many systems or more than one system to have the knowledge how to verify the credentials. Only one system. That's because it's called single sign-on. Single sign-on does not mean our users only have to log in once when they come into the office in the morning, then grab a coffee, and they can work with every system. That's a side effect of single sign-on, but that's not the root of the word single sign-on. The single is really the single system who knows about our credentials. Yeah, and when it comes to real users, of course, they want to have a simple and secure solution. And you all know simple and secure. These are two, choose one. You always have to choose what is more relevant for you. Has it to be more simple, or has it to be more secure? The more secure, the less simple it will be, at least for you as a developer. If you want to make it simple for the users, for the end users, and secure for the data, then the effort is at your side, the developer's side. Yeah, how do you authenticate? Of course, with our username, email, or whatever, a password, a simple secret, a temporary link, or a mobile phone, or whatever. But then how do we transport these authentication infos to all the systems? Of course, with a token. And the token is nothing new. Already in the beginning of 2000s, we have the SAML, the Security Search and Markup Language, which is pretty cool XML. No, XML and cool doesn't work, doesn't fit together. It's powerful, but it's kind of complex, and it doesn't feel good, and all these claims are difficult to handle. And when we talk today about web applications and lightweight serialization and such things like JSON, JavaScript, it's really hard to handle XML with JavaScript. I tried it once and I gave up after 2 days. But the token itself is nothing really new. And because SAML isn't working pretty good with web technologies in nowadays, there's the OAuth 2 framework or specification, which deals with authorization. OAuth 2 has nothing to do with authentication. It just deals with authorization. Who is allowed to do what? Which system may access another system in your name? Of course, you have to be authenticated before you can give a third-party system the authority to access your own system. But the authentication process is no standard way when using OAuth 2. OAuth 2 is just authorization. And the authentication process is completely different implemented when looking at the OAuth implementation of Twitter or of Facebook or of GitHub or whatever. So you can use the login feature of Twitter or Facebook, Google for your application. But that's not really authentication. That's only authorization. You grant access to your application to access Twitter in your name when you're not in front of your computer. And furthermore, if you implement many of these providers, you have to implement different ways of how to retrieve the user information, the user profile information, because every response from every system looks different. So OAuth 2 is just for authorization and not for authentication. But it's pretty powerful when it comes to web applications or handling in the web, and it has different so-called grant types or authorization flows. There's the authorization code flow, is the standard flow, which deals with many redirects between the systems and the browser. And simple said, the user wants to access, okay, I can show you here, an abstract protocol flow. The user wants to access a secured resource on the resource server, and the resource server says, hey, you're not authenticated, please log in, authenticate yourself, and then I will see if you're allowed to do, and redirects the user to a login page of the authorization server. And after the user logs in, the authorization server sends back an authorization code. That's why it's called the authorization code flow. And with the authorization code flow in the browser, with a redirect to the application the client wants to access, the application itself can grab the token from the authorization server, and the token expresses what the user is allowed to do. So with the token, the resource server can deliver the protected resource to the client. That's the most powerful grant type or authorization flow, authorization code. And if you don't have the possibility to take the authorization code flow and grab the token from the authorization server, because that's you need an additional secret for the client fetching the token at the authorization server, and if you can't provide this secret, for example, in a public website, JavaScript site, you need something other, because you can somehow encrypt or hash the secret, but it's still in the front end, the browser, and the user's device. So the secret isn't a secret anymore. And therefore, you have the implicit flow, and with the implicit flow, you get implicit the token back to the response after the user logs in successfully. If you don't have any chances, or you don't want to have some redirects between systems and the user's browser, you can use the resource owner password credentials flow. It's quite a nice word, resource owner password credentials. I have to read it every time. And that's kind of an API sending the credentials directly to the authorization server and get back the token. But this is the least secure possibility, because you as the client application you have to have the credentials in your application to send it to the authorization server. In the regular cases of authorization code or implicit flow, the authorization server delivers the login page, and the user enters his credentials directly at the authorization server. And with the resource owner password credentials flow, the user enters the credentials at your application, and you take the credentials and send them to the authorization server. So there are chances for man-in-the-middle attacks. And when it comes to system-to-system authorization, there's the client credentials flow. This is just for, it's like the authorization code or the implicit flow, but just for backend applications. There's no browser involved and no redirects. And lastly, you have the refresh token flow, because every token has a special lifetime, and after the token is invalid, you have to renew, to refresh the token. You can do this with the refresh token flow. And that's how the access token response looks like when your application gets the response from the token fetch from the authorization server. You have the access token itself. It can be just a opaque string with no means for outside world. The token type is bearer. It's always bearer when dealing with auth2. This is written in the spec. It has an expiry range. It expires in 3,600 seconds, and you have the refresh token. With the refresh token, you can refresh invalid access token. So normally, the access token has a very short lifetime, between a few seconds and, I say, 5 minutes. And the refresh token has a long lifetime, let's say, half an hour, or whatever. So this access token, you can take this access token, the string, and to know what your user or your client is allowed to do, you have to take this access token and ask the authorization server, what is this user with this access token allowed to do? And additionally, you don't know who is this user. You can only check what is this user allowed to do. You don't know who is this user. And this is where OpenID Connect comes in. OpenID Connect is not OpenID. It has nothing to do with OpenID. It's just hosted by the OpenID Foundation, which is also doing OpenID. And but it's called OpenID Connect, and it's based, technically, it's based on auth2 with the auth2 flows, and it standardizes user profile information and identity information. So it brings in an identity token additionally to the access token. You have an identity token, and it adds an user profile endpoint where you can grab identity information, profile information of the user with his current access token. And a few more RESTful endpoints for dealing with all this stuff. So this is the identity token coming into the response. We have the access token, the refresh token. Now we have the identity token. But how does it look like? How is the identity stored into the token? And this is where JSON Web Tokens come in. JSON Web Token, it's a standard since 2015, 3 years old. And JSON Web Tokens are simply 3 concatenated base64 encoded strings. So we have the 3 strings mentioned in different colors. And what it is like, it's a header, it's a payload, and it's a signature. And if you decode this, can you read it? Yeah, I think yes. You see the header it just contains the type. The JWT has the type JWT, okay, and the algorithm with which the signature is signed, or the signature is created. Then you have the payload. For the payload, you have a few reserved claims. We come to this in the next slide. The possible claims, or the attributes are called claims in terms of JWT. And the signature is a string concatenated of a base 64 encoded header and payload, and depending on the type of the algorithm used, a synchronized algorithm, the HS256, with just a secret, or you can use the RS256 for private public key usage. So the token itself is so-called self-contained, and you can always check if the token was changed by some third party when you get the token. And so you have a certain kind of trust level when you get the token, if the token itself is valid or is not valid. Because only if you know the secret when it comes to synchronized signature, or you have to know the private key when dealing with private public key encryption. So you don't have to check the token at another endpoint. You can do this, of course, if you really need this kind of security, but you don't have to use this endpoint. Yeah, the payload itself, it has some reserved claims: the subject, issuer, audition, and expiry. These are the only claims JWT claims for itself. The subject is for whom is the token issued. Most of the time, this is kind of a user ID. The issuer is the issuing system, represented as an URL. The audition, for which client application this token was issued, for my API or for my shop or for whatever system, and the expiry date. And as the spec says, JWT mustn't be used when the expiry date has expired. So you have to check the signature. If the signature is valid, then you can use the token. Otherwise, you must not use this token. And it has to have a valid expiry date. The rest of the payload, you can choose freely whatever you want to put in the payload as you like. OpenID Connect adds some more claims, standard claims, to the JWT token. So if you use JWT in terms of OpenID Connect, you have to use these claims. I don't know, it's difficult to read. There was no other way to fit all the information to one slide. But it's on the website of OpenID. So you have claims for the name, the given name, the family name, the middle name, the nickname, preferred username, and so on. Also, in the bottom, you can see there's also address, and address is not only a string, it's a JSON object, so we have a nested object for the address information. And the address object itself is also specified. Yeah. So, using JWT changes our access token response to look like this. We have the access token. The access token itself is, when using OpenID Connect, also expressed in JWT, and we have the token type, the expiries in. When using JWT, you don't need to use this expires in attribute because the token itself has an expiry date. And you have the identity token in a JWT format and the refresh token also. It doesn't make real sense to have the refresh token as a JWT, but yeah, for simplicity reasons, all tokens are JWT tokens. The refresh token itself contains just unique string for identifying this session on the authorization server. Okay, and how can this token be used? The user, after successful authentication, has a token. He passes to the web application, and the web application itself can pass the same token to backend systems if this application needs to access third-party or further backend systems. As we can see later in the demo, it's also possible that the web application grabs an own so-called service account token for authentication, authenticating itself against backend systems, or it can pass the user token to the backend systems. So, short conclusion for tokens. A token is signed, we have seen this, and contains all necessary information about a user and its roles. So in the access token, all the roles the user has should be included. We have different kinds of tokens. We have identity tokens, refresh tokens, access tokens, and sometimes you have things like an offline token. An offline token, a user can request to have an offline token issued for another application, and this other application can use this offline token for perhaps regular tasks at night when the user is not online, creating reports or whatever, sending emails to exchange this offline token to a valid access token and act in behalf of the user, even if the user is not online. But the user has to initiate the process for creating an offline token. So there's no global offline token a system can use to act in behalf of a user. The tokens are sent in bearer format, most often in the HTTP header authorization. And we have a total time to live. And of course, tokens must be revocable. I forgot this to mention. An access token itself, once it is issued, it doesn't need to be verified at the authorization server, as said before. That's right, because it's signed and it's self-contained. So once it is issued, it is valid, and every system using it can be sure that it's valid. But what if the token is stolen or whatever? That's because the access token should have a very, very short total time to live. I recommend most often between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, because that's the amount of time a third party can misuse this token if it gets the token. And after this time, you have to use the refresh token and to refresh the access token to get a new access token. And if you have, in the meantime, the token, the session revoked at the authorization server, the server won't access a new won't create a new access token, and the third party can't use the token anymore. So this must be revocable. And as I'm a Java developer most of the times, currently I'm dealing with the JavaScript, I ask myself, what does Java offer to deal with OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect? And unfortunately, it's not that much. It's becoming better, but it's very sad. The big Java EE standard, now it's called Jakarta EE, has a new security API, JSR 275, which is quite nice, this API, but it doesn't deal with OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect, JWT. There are some discussions on the mailing list and the issue list to integrate it or not and how to do it, but for now there's nothing included. Spring Security already made OAuth 2 a first-class citizen in its implementation. And before Security 5, you had to use a third-party library to use OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect with Spring Security. Now it's included out of the box in Spring Security. And there's some other libraries. For example, there's Apache Shiro, one of the well-known libraries dealing with security, but also Shiro doesn't have OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect JWT included. There's some community efforts, but nothing in the library itself. But there's another library called Apache All2, which does contain all the standards. And my favorite question at every conference, who knows All2? One. Okay. Even me didn't know this library until I prepared the talk and had a look which libraries are out there dealing with OAuth 2. And yeah, it seems it's a powerful library, but nobody knows. There are lots of more libraries available, some dealing with OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, some not. And there are, of course, a lot of libraries dealing with JWT. Looking at the ecosystem, what's available for storing user data and providing all the flows and processes, endpoints. Of course, you can use Auth0 or AWS Cognito, Stormpath as some managed services providing all this functionality. But you have to outsource your users' data, the credentials. And that's, I think, most of the time not that's what you want to do, to give other companies the credentials of your users. And besides other projects, I like to use KeyCloak from JBoss. It's an open source project. It's not just a library, it's a complete system providing all the services for identity and access management. And yeah, in most of the cases, it can be a good fit. I also had some use cases at customers where I said, okay, KeyCloak can do it, but it's not the best fit for your needs. Take another solution. But in the last few years, most of the projects I did with my customers, I introduced KeyCloak to them, and they're pretty happy. So let's look into some demo, how I did it. First, the architecture. It's pretty simple. I have a shop system as the main system a user interacts with, and a stock service and a shipping service in the backend. And the user gets a user token, pass it to the shop, and the shop itself gets a service account token issued for accessing the stock service, because the stock service is also secured. Only allowed resources may access the stock service. And for calculating the shipping costs, the shipping service needs the user token. So the shop passes the user token to the shipping service. So this is KeyCloak. This is the admin interface, and I have to make it so looks better. Yeah, I have created a shop client. This is my shop application, and the client protocol is OpenID Connect. KeyCloak also supports SAML, but we don't want to deal with SAML. Want only to deal with OpenID Connect. And this is a confidential client, which means this client has a secret for accessing the KeyClock server. It's like a password for the system itself. And you can find it here. It's a secret. It's generated. And yeah, we have a user. User has username user, and this user has a role called user, very surprising. And yeah, we can now access our shop. Oh, I have to start it first. It's a Spring Boot application. I will show you some code. A few minutes. So we have the shop, localhost 8081. No. Looks better. It's my shop. I come from Germany. That's because the euro symbol. And I want to access a secured resource. And the application redirects me to the KeyClock server to log in. And all the things you can see on this page are coming with KeyCloak. You don't have to implement them themselves. The login process, you have a register option, you have a forgotten password option, you have a remember me option. You have the option to use social login providers, or you can connect your LDAP or Active Directory to KeyCloak, so that KeyCloak just does the authentication process, but the credentials are stored in an Active Directory and all this stuff. You don't have to implement it yourself. And then we can log in as a user. And that's my cats shop. You can buy cats. You can see I'm the user. And now I can put cats into the cart. Some double rounding feature. We can see we have some stock information about the cats. And the image service is a bit slow. It's a public service with random pics. And we have shipping costs of approximately €10. And if I now log out and do some reconfiguration of my user, I tell it's a VIP. I give the user just a simple attribute with the value true. And now if I log in again and put cats into my cart, you can see there are no shipping costs, because if the user has a VIP attribute, there are no shipping costs used. So that's the application itself. Let's look into the code, what I had to do to realize all this, besides of the business logic. For configuration of KeyCloak for a Spring Boot application, and Spring Boot it's really simple, but other Java application servers are quite similar. We have to provide some configuration. It's a realm. It's called Vox Zurich. let's look here. It's called Vox Zurich. This is the realm configured in KeyCloak. We have a server URL. It's localhost 8080. We have the secret. Our resource is called shop. We saw this. And in our principal attribute, we want to have the preferred username claim. That's one of the OpenID Connect reserved claims. And we use the servlet security specification to configure a security collection, which says all resources beneath the path shop should require a user role. That's why we were redirected to the login page. I didn't wrote any code to redirect the user to the login page. Just this configuration leads to the login page of KeyCloak, because the KeyCloak adapter, which is included in the application, which is just a dependency in the POM. We have KeyCloak Spring Boot Starter, and this dependency brings all the adapter logic to redirect to the server. And if I authenticate myself, come back to the application, then the application fetches the access token from the KeyCloak server and knows I'm a valid user with a user role, and leads me to the catalog, which is done by the shop controller. And when we have a look to the stocks, get stocks method, we have the stock service get stocks, and we use a REST template, which I called KeyCloak client auth REST template, and I implemented myself. It's just an extended standard REST template from Spring, and did some configuration magic. This is the auth REST template, and make use of the auth client, auth set client. This client comes with KeyCloak adapters, the dependency mentioned in the POM XML. And this client eases the process for authenticating the application itself against KeyCloak to get a service account access token, which is needed by the stock service. And we can see the stock service. The stock service itself needs the role stocks. And as we can see it, our user doesn't have the role stocks. It's available, but it's not assigned. And our client shop service account roles, there it is, has an assigned role stocks. So the shop application itself verifies, authenticates itself at KeyCloak, gets an access token, and passes it to the stocks service. And because the token contains the stocks role, it's allowed to access the stocks service. And we have the shipping service at last service. This also needs the user's role, and KeyCloak forwards the user token to the shipping service. And in the shipping controller, I can access the KeyCloak security context through the request, and in this context I can get a token, or also I can get some identity token to get identity information or whatever I need. And here I check the VIP claim just for completeness, and The interesting part is in the shop application again. Shipping service. I just use a regular REST template, but I configured the REST template to use the KeyCloak REST template customizer. This also comes with KeyCloak. And the KeyCloak REST template customizer is, so I need to find it. No, that's just the interface. The interceptor, yes, the interceptor. And the interceptor just cares about getting attributes from the request, get the user principal, and somewhere, getting the KeyCloak security context and putting the token from the security context into the request to the shipping service, to the backend. So I didn't write any code to secure my applications, just did configuration using the KeyCloak application, the KeyCloak system server, and can make use of a highly secured application landscape. So that's it. Time is over. I hope you enjoyed the session, and if you have any questions, we have some 4 minutes left. Just ask your questions, raise your hands, or come in front of me. Yeah.
You have the code online somewhere where you can download and play around with this?
The code is not yet online, but I can put it online later on. And I will tweet the path to the repository. So just follow me at Das Niko, and you will be informed. Okay. Because, but it's no real code. It's just configuration. The code is a standard Java Spring Boot code. It's nothing. There's no security code. It's just configuration and make use of the KeyCloak. It's some KeyCloak magic about the configuration of the REST templates, but nothing more. Yeah. Okay. There's one more.
I don't find the ice cream. Can you?
Yeah, sure. Just a stupid question. How securing? What is the purpose also to secure the communication between the shop service, if I remember what the name, and the other two services? I mean, speaking about the normal way, we should be in a safe area.
Did everybody understand the question, or should I repeat it? Okay. What's the purpose of securing the both back-end systems, the stock service and the shipping service? Because normally we should be in a controlled and secured area. If it's really secured in this area, most of the attacks at systems came from internal networks, and even if you're in your own intranet, controlled whatever, at least the administrator knows how to attack a system, and you should secure all your systems, regardless if the environment claims to be secure or not. You should always use HTTPS. You should always use authentication and authorization. So you always can check at the stock service when and how often the shop accessed the stock service. So for auditing reasons or whatever, you have the best basics.
And then you propagate the user identity.
In the second, you propagate the user identity to the shipping service. Yes. but this can be needed because some VIPs don't have to pay shipping costs, whatever. Yeah. But this always also can be a risk of propagating user identities to other systems. So you have always to deal with the pros and cons of your solution. No system is perfectly secure. Yeah.
One more question to scopes. I haven't seen that you use OAuth scopes to protect the endpoints. Isn't it usually done by this way? I saw that you used now the user roles.
Yeah.
So is it a feature or missing feature in KeyCloak that you use roles instead of scopes?
He asked if I missed, why I missed the scopes from OAuth 2, and if it's a missing feature of KeyCloak, why I'm using roles and not scopes. Which scopes exactly do you mean from OAuth 2? Okay. Okay. Is this really a part of the specification, or is this a way of most companies do it? Okay. KeyCloak first of all makes use of OpenID Connect and JWT. And OpenID Connect is based on OAuth 2, just for the flows. And because OpenID Connect uses JWT, and JWT can express all what you want, you don't have to use some other possibilities, scopes into additionally to JWT, so you can put all the information you need in your token. So you don't have to use scopes from one technology, from the auth 2 technology, and use tokens from OpenID Connect. Of course, you can mix it if you want. You can how you put your authorization information into the token, if it's roles or scopes, it's completely up to you. But OpenID Connect deals not with authorization, it deals with authentication. And in authentication, you don't need roles or scopes. It's just an addition to all this kind of stuff. And yeah, authorization with KeyCloak can be a pain in my eyes. For authentication, it's pretty good. Authentication and authorization can be really pain. Okay, time is over. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.